their own experiences without being biased or being judged by the quality of their presentation. So the GYSCC is conceptualized as not an academic conference. It's not a place where we are expecting high-level scientific information. We actually ask our participants to come as they are. So if you're able to make a PowerPoint presentation, that's good. If you're able to speak in English, that's fine. If you can only speak in your indigenous language, you're highly welcome. If you can only speak through art, through music, through painting, through culture, that is fantastic. We are basically facilitating dialogues amongst, by, and for indigenous youths. And just to say, we use those words inclusively because, as you probably guess, I'm not exactly youth anymore. And I've said before, I'm not specifically indigenous, but I am native, and I do facilitate interactions. And that's what the GYCC is all about. So ladies and gentlemen, that's the introduction to this panel. I now invite our first speaker, Frikulo Kapisa, to give us a 4-minute talk about our experiences as an indigenous youth leader. Over to you, Kapisa.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Temitope. Good morning, everyone. When we were planning and conceptualizing this session, I was told that it will be very good if I can greet in my native language, but in the indigenous language. But I was sharing with my colleague Tope and the others that we do not have any specific greetings that can be translated into hello or hi or whatever the forms. We greet, we talk based on the context, on the situation, on the time. But we do have, whenever we have a ceremony or a function or an activity going on, we begin by giving thanks. And that's how I would like to start my speech. We say, Oraji Made Afo Ojimasha Afo. That means we give thanks to the Sky Father and Mother Earth. So every function, every ritual, every ceremony in my community, that is the Naga people. The Naga people are an indigenous community that lives in the northeastern part of India and northwest Myanmar. So we begin by saying, Orachimade Afo Ojumasha Afo, giving thanks to the Sky Father and honoring the Mother Earth. So yes, I'd like to tell a very short story about my people, and I'd like to link with sustainability and climate change mitigation. Our story, the Naga story begin with the first being. It's not categorized as, it is not categorized as human being or people, but as the first being. The first being is a woman. And one day, the first being, sitting under a banyan tree, was enveloped or surrounded by cloud. And she became the mother of spirit, the spirit world, tiger representing the animal world, and man, the human world, or the people as we see. So the reason why I want to start with this story is because our story begins, our creation and our story begins with these three forms of life: the spirit, the animal world, and human being, from the same mother. So coexistence is inbuilt into our story, and coexistence is built into our story. It is not something that we try to do or we try to achieve as the modern world or the present world, which we try now, climate change mitigation and all this. But for our indigenous community, it begins with that. It is built with it. So that is one thing I want to say. And most of the knowledge systems are recorded and transmitted through our folklores and folk songs. So, say for instance, we have stories that connect or that tells us about the different rain cycles annually. Am I? Yeah, okay. So yeah, I'll just finish this. So we have the annual rain cycle. So based on that, if in the annual rain cycle, so we have for more major 4 rain cycles in a year. So if one of this cycle is interrupted or missed, then the people know that there is going to be drought or flood. So people prepare themselves for drought and flood. Accordingly, they will plant and cultivate crops which are suitable or which are ideal for such extreme weather or season. So this is just an example. This is just one example I'd like to share. So indigenous people and their indigenous people knowledge and their culture is full of this. This is just one example of one community. And I'd like to appeal or highlight this. Imagine the many indigenous communities around the world. If we're able to respect, if we're able to tap into the indigenous resources, indigenous knowledge and resources, then we can already imagine what it can do to sustainability and climate change mitigations. Thanks, Tope. Sorry.
Sir, sorry, we really had to cut short our talk. We have just 90 minutes for 8 of us, and we really want this to be an interactive session. So we have just about 3 minutes. Perhaps we have any question or intervention from the audience. We also want to invite our online audience to please share any comment or question in the chat. If you're on Uva, if you're on YouTube, you can also comment. But particularly those on Uva, please share a question or a comment in the chat, and we'll be happy to take it. If there is none, then we can move ahead. But just to ensure that we're truly inclusive, can we have any show of hand if someone wants to make a very, very short comment? I know we just started. But the idea is that after each speaker speaks for about 4 minutes, we can actually have an intervention from the audience. And then at the end of all the speaking, we have about 15 minutes to interact generally. So is there any comment? Yes, Erica, 30 seconds, please.
Thank you so much, Kapesa, for starting us off. I'm wondering if you already have these sort of protections in place against extreme events. Are you seeing any changes or deepening of the events that are challenging the practices that you've had in place for so long? So are those 4 seasons still holding, or are they changing? Are the droughts longer and more extreme, the floods? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, with the spread of earlier colonialism and now globalization and commercialization, all indigenous methods and practices of sustainability, farming, everything are being swept away. So we see a lot of extreme weathers in the current times. Say we also see a lot of very new and different species of pests and other issues that the local people are facing. So that is the sad reality. A lot of this are getting lost. The earlier indigenous practices and institutions in place are getting lost because now everyone wants to adopt a more commercial scale of farming, agriculture, and everything. And with the use of fertilizers, chemicals, and many other things, the balance is very much disturbed. No longer in. Yes, that is the sad part. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And we now move on to the next speaker who is going to be joining us online. We have Heather Jean Gordon. She's going to be speaking to us for the next 4 minutes. Heather, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Tope, for having me. And I'll say Paglagifsi, that's a Nukyak for welcome.
Can we spotlight her?
Okay, thank you. Paglagifsi, welcome. My name is Heather Soyak Jean Kwamboka Gordon. I'm a Nupyak. I'm an Inuit person from Alaska, and I married into a Kisi family from Kenya. My Kisi name is Kwamboka. I'm talking a little bit about Arctic people, and there is over 40 different groups of Arctic people stretching across the circumpolar north, which includes Alaska, Canada, Greenland, Norway, Finland, Sweden, and Russia. Of course, those are the names we see used most often, but we all have names for our own lands as well. The Arctic has been massively impacted by climate change. I know you're in an Arctic nation right now. The region is really warming 4 times faster than the global average. And we're seeing this impact all parts of life, you know, infrastructure through flooding, erosion, and permafrost melt, as well as changes to our foods and lifeways as waters warm. And climate change is mixed with, as was just explained, unsustainable management practices. And these immensely hurt our ways of life and our ability to live sustainably like we've been doing for years. As Indigenous people, our knowledge system is based on this relational kinship, that humans are not alone and not above anyone else, but we're part of an ecological system. And we see kinship and relationship with all things, not just plants and animals, but rivers and mountains. And if with this kinship view, it creates a sustainable way to live. If you care for the river and you care for the salmon, would you pollute the water? Would you overharvest the fish? The relationship is that if you don't overharvest the fish and you care for the water and the lands, then the fish will want to come back. And it's this reciprocal relationship that's so important to Indigenous ways of sustainability and also land and water management. And these things are passed down from our elders, our aunties, our uncles, our parents to youth. It gives us instructions on how to live as a good and a whole person, recognizing our part in the greater world. And as climate change, you know, the results of colonization, this taking from the environment constantly, and these capitalist economic systems that are all about profit, they really forget to look at the fact of life and sustainability and how our overall human survival and food systems are coming at great risk. And as Indigenous people, as we lose the relationship to our lands and food systems that we've had for millennia, we're not only just seeing physical health issues with a change of diet, but there's actual physical and mental health changes due to that loss of connection with our land, with our culture, and who we are. And this is something we really worry about for our young people. So I just want to emphasize that we have a millennia of Indigenous knowledges to draw on. And in the US, we often talk about the 7 generations. Think 7 generations back and 7 generations forward when we're planning. That's 1,600 years that people are planning for. We see Arctic, you know, Arctic plans coming out or sustainability plans for countries that are 10-year plans. Indigenous people have at minimum a 1,600-year plan going at all times. So I just want to really emphasize that our youth are our leaders of tomorrow, and they're drawing on countless generations of knowledge that has gone before them. And that our biggest challenge is really the government and organization, colonizing structures that we live under, that don't listen to our knowledges, don't consider them valid or scientific, and we're often given an advisory role instead of a decision-making role. So we have so many youth entering the higher education system now and really serving as those boundary spanners between knowledge systems. Trying to communicate our sustainable way to live for not only humans, but for our kin all over the world.
Thank you, Eda. I'm sorry I had to cut you short there.
That was it.
Yes, well, that was great, and I know that you're a great talker. Do we have any intervention here for Heather? Yes, we have someone at the back. 30 seconds, hopefully. We're running out of time a bit. Please, your name and where you come from.
I'm Wilfred Lunga. I'm
Yeah.
from Zimbabwe.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation. My question is, the world is changing. Technology is taking over, and it's believed that in the future, actually, machines will take over. What are you doing as youth to make sure that that knowledge which you are sharing with us actually will remain during that time when machines are taking over? Thank you.
Fantastic. Heather, over to you.
Okay, I'll say two really quick things. I would say one thing that I would think about is that as Indigenous people, we've constantly adapted and drawn on different technologies ourselves. So I don't always think that technology is so separate. But I'm not sure where that will go with machines. But in regards to machines, I want to say quickly, talking about um, the Sami people just in northern Norway are dealing with, this idea of the green energy revolution and the bringing of wind turbines, to supposedly make us more sustainable, but it's harming the reindeer grazing land and that traditional way of life. So I think that Indigenous youth are constantly in this position of advocating and boundary spanning, and that's really where I see Indigenous youth today. And a huge part of this summit, the GIYCC, was hearing all these different perspectives and these young people who are stepping up to these plates and creating their own seat at tables that do not welcome them.
I think we have time for one more intervention, could be a comment as well. I don't see any chats online. Any other intervention? Heather, can you just mention one thing, one adaptation that youths, especially from your own community, have evolved in coping with the impacts of climate change?
Yeah, one of the biggest things that we've been dealing with as a Nupik people and Yupik people in Alaska is being on the coast, is that we're having massive coastal erosion due to late sea ice formation and early sea ice leaving. So the big storms are hitting our coasts. And so houses are starting to kind of fall in, and cemeteries and different things like that. And there has been, just unbelievable youth advocacy and storytelling. And I think at this point, it's been difficult because a lot of our climate change issues in the Arctic are really, really expensive. Like moving a community back from the coastline costs millions of dollars. And for our youth, right now, in regard to that, what they've been doing in regards to advocacy and making a point to be in these spaces is really a huge adaptation we've seen. Instead of people, really living locally and having that community-based, land-based relationship. It's really forced people to exit their community, enter a different education system, and have to be in these spaces that separate them from their families and their elders. And I think that is actually an adaptation in itself.
Thank you very much, Heather. On this note, we move back to the in-person plenary, and we would now like to hear all the way from South America contributions from Nadino Kalapucha. Over to you.
I was saying hello everyone in my language. Alipunja, Tukuigunawa, Nyukashutimang Nadino, Ecuador Manda Shamunia. I want to say good morning everyone. I am Nadino. I am Quechua from the Amazon jungle of Ecuador. I don't know how many people speak Spanish here. So my English is very bad, so I will speak in Spanish. Hola con todos, muy buenos días. Para mí es un honor estar esta mañana aquí. Soy Nadino y bueno, pues soy de la Amazonía. Muchos hayan escuchado como un mito, como una leyenda o como una fantasía sobre la Amazonía. Pero la Amazonía es un bioma importante en el mundo y se encuentra en 9 países de Sudamérica: Brasil, Bolivia, Perú, Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, Surinam, Guyana y Guyana Francesa. En este territorio, que para muchos es solamente un bioma, pues estamos más de 511 pueblos indígenas que hablamos más de 300 lenguas originarias, y mi pueblo es una de ellas. Y para nosotros es nuestro hogar y es nuestra madre. Para muchos solamente es un escenario de diversidad biológica. La Amazonía alberga alrededor de alberga un tercio de especies de plantas y animales y produce el 20% de agua dulce del planeta. y captura entre 70.000 a 100.000 millones de toneladas de carbono. Pero esta Amazonía está en riesgo. Los pueblos indígenas, sobre todo nuestros abuelos, habían advertido que si seguíamos con un modelo de desarrollo que destruye, que no respeta la vida de las plantas, de los espíritus, de los animales y de los pueblos, podríamos entrar en una crisis. Y esa crisis ha llegado, porque el mundo ha optado por un desarrollo que destruye, por un modelo de desarrollo que genera capital, pero no genera la garantía de derechos humanos y de la naturaleza. En el año 2021, el panel científico por la Amazonía, una coalición de más de 230 científicos que investigan y estudian el comportamiento de la Amazonía, junto a pueblos indígenas, advirtieron que la Amazonía está entrando a un punto de no retorno, porque más del 20% de su bioma, es decir, de su corazón, está deforestado. Y está deforestada para cultivar carne, soya, caña, palmas, que muchas veces producen en este continente. Pero esto también ha significado la persecución, el asesinato de pueblos indígenas y sobre todo de jóvenes. En el 2021, la organización indígena más grande del planeta, la COICA, advirtió que cada 2 días un defensor o una defensora era asesinada en la cuenca amazónica. Y eso por defender ese territorio y ese bioma importante para la estabilidad climática. Pero no nos quedamos en la queja, los pueblos indígenas estamos trabajando y los jóvenes estamos en la primera línea del fuego. Estamos poniendo nuestras vidas para defender ese bioma importante que es para la estabilidad climática. Y hoy necesitamos hacer un llamado. Y han pasado más de 28 conferencias sobre cambio climático, pero no ha habido acciones concretas. Los pueblos indígenas decimos, aquí ponemos nuestro territorio, aquí ponemos nuestro conocimiento, aquí ponemos nuestros sistemas de gobernanza para seguir defendiendo ese territorio. Pero hacemos una pregunta al mundo. ¿Cómo ustedes se van a sumar? ¿Cómo nos van a seguir apoyando para que nosotros podamos seguir cumpliendo con este rol? Entonces es importante seguir trabajando juntos y para mí, una vez más, es un honor estar aquí. Muchas gracias.
Yes. Even though I didn't hear a word of what he said, but the translation helped me, but you can all feel the passion in his voice. And that's the beauty of indigenous languages. Even if you can't understand the translation, I'm sure you can feel it in his voice and in his actions. So basically, he was talking about biodiversity decline in the Amazon, the impact that this has on indigenous cultures and traditions that has been passed down from generations, and their fathers have warned them whether the state of things, these cultures and traditions will essentially be lost, and we are seeing that right now. So at the moment in Amazon, we are facing a very serious crisis. I picked that from what he said, at least through the translation. I believe I tried. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. So with that, we have just time for one intervention. And please feel free to intervene in any language. Yes, please, we have.
Being an activist and trying to save natural resources and foster conservation in many regions in the world is really dangerous. So I was wondering if you receive some sort of support of the government or different agencies, entities to prevent more environmental activists to be killed. Y quisiera saber qué es lo que han hecho para poder prevenir la muerte de los activistas ambientales. En muchas regiones del mundo, ser un activista ambiental pone en riesgo tu vida. Y somos los que defendemos desde distintas trincheras la conservación de nuestros recursos.
Muchas gracias. Nosotros no vemos como recurso a nuestros territorios, lo vemos como parte de nosotros. Y nosotros no tratamos de salvar a los bosques, sino nos tratamos de salvar nosotros mismos. Y esa lucha, como menciono, ha sido muy difícil y muy complejo y los datos lo demuestran. ¿Qué estamos haciendo? Nos hemos tenido que organizar, nos hemos tenido que defender. Los pueblos indígenas hemos creado mecanismos como un programa para defensores y defensoras indígenas que estudie estos casos, que documente estos casos, porque muchos de los casos de asesinato, persecución, no son visibilizados, porque la Amazonía es un territorio bien complejo y por lo tanto las noticias no salen. Entonces este programa trata de documentar, hacer incidencia para exigir reparación o justicia, pero es muy difícil porque los fondos climáticos, los fondos globales no aterrizan a los territorios, es decir, a las comunidades que están en la primera línea del fuego. Los gobiernos no, porque de hecho son los gobiernos los primeros que amenazan a los pueblos indígenas a través de concesiones mineras, petroleras y otras actividades. Por lo tanto, no hay garantías desde los estados, pero sí confiamos en los aliados, en los donantes que pueden trabajar con pueblos indígenas, pero cambiando esa narrativa de que los pueblos indígenas ya no somos beneficiarios, sino socios. Ustedes tienen financiamiento, ustedes tienen tecnología, nosotros tenemos territorio, nosotros tenemos conocimiento y mecanismos para la defensa de la biodiversidad de nuestro territorio.
So much, Nadino. I believe that response was, thank you. So we move now to the next speaker, another indigenous youth, quite passionate as well, but this time around from Africa. And it's my honor to invite Kadis Ben Mabiala from an indigenous community in Congo, Africa, to speak to us for 4 minutes. So Ben, you can go ahead to speak in French. So Ben is also not quite fluent in English. He will speak to us in French, and that can be translated to us. Yeah. Ben, you can go ahead. You need to unmute yourself.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead. And you can speak in
Okay,
French.
bonjour. Right. Bonjour à tous. Donc, je suis Kades Ben Mabiala, gestionnaire d'investissement, PDG de Déchic et président de Nsialon. Donc, ici, je veux mettre en avant surtout la communauté Baka qui se trouve dans le bassin du Congo. C'est vrai qu'aujourd'hui, on a parlé, j'ai écouté parler de l'asile, l'Arctique, etc. Mais il faut aussi prendre en compte l'Afrique, c'est-à-dire exactement le bassin du Congo qui regroupe environ 5 à 6 pays. Nous avons le Cameroun, le Tchad, la République démocratique du Congo, le Congo-Brazzaville, le Gabon, etc. Et cette communauté aujourd'hui a lutté contre le changement climatique, même si elle n'est pas mise en avant. Pour moi, c'est tout un honneur de mettre en avant cette communauté qui travaille de dur labeur depuis un certain moment, mais qui n'est pas pris en compte. On a parlé ici de résilience climatique, mais qu'est-ce que d'abord nous-mêmes, d'abord en tant que jeunes autochtones ou bien communautés autochtones ou autres systèmes politiques mettre en place pour lutter ou protéger ces communautés autochtones. Donc pour moi ici, il est préférable de souligner certains aspects dont toutefois les investissements subventionnels sur la lutte contre le changement climatique en aidant ces communautés d'abord à mettre en avant leur culture, cette culture qui a permis pendant des décennies à conserver peut-être ou lutter contre le changement climatique qui n'est bien sûr pas mis en avant. Les aider à développer, comme on dit, mettre en avant leur culture, développer leur savoir-faire pour permettre à ceux qui n'ont pas encore cette connaissance de savoir comment jouir ou peut-être bénéficier de leur savoir de façon traditionnelle à mettre en avant ce changement climatique qui est devenu un impact global ou mondial. Donc ici, pour moi, j'ai eu à travailler, j'ai eu à faire des recherches sur cette communauté Baka qui se trouve dans la majorité des pays d'Afrique centrale. Et c'est une communauté extraordinaire, remarquable. Je ne vais pas peut-être dire un peu plus sur ce timing parce qu'il me reste, j'ai à peine quelques minutes. Mais pour moi ici, il faut vraiment les porter plutôt attention parce que ces communautés ils ont cette capacité de mettre en avant, comme on dit, des systèmes de lutte contre le changement climatique. Mais aussi, cela, il faut les venir en aide. Les venir en aide dans quel sens? En mettant en place, par exemple, des formations pour les éduquer à pratiquer un peu plus mieux ou de façon plus réglementaire et durable certaines de leurs pratiques ancestrales. Il faut aussi peut-être les encourager en donnant des formations, en donnant des subventions pour mettre en place
des écosystèmes qui va les permettre aussi de se sentir mieux. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, la majorité de cette communauté Baka, toutes les communautés autochtones en Afrique centrale sont presque mises comme on dit, à l'échec parce qu'on les repousse. Les grandes sociétés forestières viennent déboiser, comme on dit, leur cercle de vie ou bien leur zone d'habitat. Et pour moi ici, il faut premièrement déjà susciter l'intérêt des autorités, susciter l'intérêt des organisations non gouvernementales, il faut le dire, à
Thank you,
pouvoir plaider.
Cadis.
Ah, all right.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry I had to cut you short. I know you are quite
right.
passionate. Thank you so much. Yes, so I would make an attempt to pick up what he has said. It was basically advocating and talking about his passion for the indigenous peoples from Central African countries, mentioned Cameroon, Congo, the Chad Republic, and all that. And he was talking about how there is need to encourage continuous practice of indigenous and ancestral knowledge in sustainable ways in these communities so that it doesn't get eroded with the times and westernization. And we can see how this syncs with what we've heard from South America and indeed from other areas as we will see going ahead. We now have time for questions for Cadis. Again, interventions can come from our plenary audience in person and those joining us virtually. And it can also be in any language. Anyone with a question or a comment for Cadis? Ben Mabiala from Congo? Anyone in the audience? Or we have a chat on Hoover? Okay, so I have a question for you, Cadis. And my question is actually talking about, you mentioned the issue of a lot of indigenous youths in the area losing some of this ancestral or traditional knowledge, which are actually important for the sustainability of the ecosystems there. Can you talk about ways that we can actually specifically incentivize the youths? Because if we're talking sustainability, then we need to think the next generation. I actually call it the now generation. What ways do you think we can incentivize their participation, active participation in, promoting these indigenous practices that can help to sustain, to help them to be further resilient, especially in Africa, which is quite a peculiar continent. Yeah.
Merci, Jimmy Topé, pour la question. Je dirais par des actions un peu plus concrètes. Par exemple, aujourd'hui, on parle du GIYSCC, qui est très intéressant pour moi. Je me suis intégré dessus parce que ça permet non seulement de mettre en avant différentes communautés autochtones, mais ça permet aussi à d'autres communautés autochtones de pouvoir découvrir qu'il y a d'autres aussi, de gauche à droite, qui eux aussi œuvrent pour mettre en avant leurs pratiques ancestrales. Et à part ça aussi, il serait nécessaire de mettre en place ce qu'on appelle peut-être des petits centres d'orientation, peut-être de formation, pour permettre à ces derniers de pouvoir se mettre en avant. Aujourd'hui, on a plusieurs d'autres communautés autochtones qui ne sont peut-être pas encore connues du monde entier, mais en ayant cette visibilité que d'autres peuvent se mettre en avant, ça les permettra peut-être aussi à eux de s'approcher, de pouvoir aussi crier, comme on dit, à haute voix, pour permettre mettre en avant leur culture ancestrale.
Yes, thank you very much, Cadis. He mentions training centers and actual activities, and I must say that the summit that we've started convening from last year is actually one of those opportunities for indigenous youth to put themselves forward and be able to, showcase the indigenous cultures and traditions and also enable sponsorship opportunities to spread this across the region and indeed across the world. And so it's time for my own contribution. I introduced myself earlier. I'm from Nigeria. I'm native to the Yoruba people, but specific to the Ijebu people in southwestern Nigeria. So we greeting in the morning, for instance, would be Ekaro, generally in Yoruba, And we can also say, Ewe so yemi, Ewe so bami. I'm greeting my father, my mother. In Nigeria, we're quite a dynamic and complex nation. Just to let you know that we have over 500 ethnic groups and languages in Nigeria alone. Even though English is the main language we speak, but we have all these different dialects. And in Nigeria, we also have some indigenous peoples. In the far north, we have the Fulanis, but they don't, they cut across Nigeria and other African countries as well. And then in the Niger Delta region, we have the Ogoni people. And then we also have down southwest, we have the Ilaje people. And these people, the Ilaje people, are much closer to me because they're in the southwest Nigeria. They live on the coasts. I live in Lagos, it's a coastal city. Probably know Lagos, the mega city where over 24 million people. Small, relatively small in land size, but we're surrounded by water, lagoon and the Atlantic Ocean. And so these Ilaje people are one of those that have been experiencing the adverse impact of climate change in terms of sea level rise, in terms of coastal erosion. Particularly in recent times, they've been in the news where whole communities have had their homes literally washed away by water. And this has caused conflicts. It's actually disrupted livelihoods. So the larger people, most of their means of livelihood is fishing. And so a lot of them in this area have lost that because of this. Of course, we also have the compounding problems of pollution in the area. And then we moved down north to the Ogoni land. You've probably heard about conflicts in that area, being exacerbated by crude oil extraction and literal devastation and degradation of their very, very biodiversity-rich community. And further north in Nigeria, you've probably heard about farmer-herder conflicts. It's a very, very big problem now. And it's cut across not just Nigeria alone, it's moving across West Africa. Right now, we have pastoralists who, because of the impacts of climate change, desertification, no grasses for their livestock to graze. This is their only means of livelihood. They're moving down south, invading farms of people who are down south, and this is causing serious, we have whole communities that are wiped out by these invading herders. And so the issues are beyond just biodiversity decline and losing livelihoods and losing cultures and tradition, is also resulting in devastating human conflicts. And this is what we experience on a daily basis in Nigeria and across some West African countries. Some, because they have no other means of livelihood, no training, have had to resort to ways of adapting or ways of defending themselves or ways of sustaining themselves. And some people actually die in the process. Moving across Africa and Nigeria, because I lead the Africa, the GYCC started from Africa in terms of leadership. Last year we had experiences, and I also tend to talk a lot, so I need to time myself. Yes, we had experiences from people from Morocco who have issues around water scarcity. We had from Kenya, who are also having the same issues with water scarcity and food crisis and a lot of that. I will stop now because I'm 2 minutes beyond my time, and we have time for one question for me or comment. Thank you. Any comment or intervention from the room or from the online audience? All right. All right, so I think I have time to say just a bit more for the next 30 seconds. And so basically what we're doing in the GYSCC is that we're trying to bring these people forward. Like I said, I am a broker. We want to hear from these people themselves. Last year we had one of the Fulani young ladies actually come on board It resulted in a nature commentary. She was part of the main authors, and she talked about the experiences of our people. And she was also one of the speakers at the summit. This year, we are inviting such people. Like I said, across Africa, in Nigeria alone, we're over 500 ethnic groups. Ethnic groups, not necessarily indigenous groups. And across Africa, we're also quite a lot. But we need these people to come forward. And we are saying that this platform is a free platform for you to get your voices heard. The truth is that some of us, or for some of these indigenous people, they can't find the platforms or opportunities to get their voices heard. And that's what we're doing with the GYCC. And we hope you can support us in your own ways and in your own communities and groups to get these people out there to make their voices heard. And so with that, ladies and gentlemen, I move to the next speaker, who is joining us online all the way from Singapore. I now invite Fari Ridwan to speak to us for the next 4 minutes, please.
Hi everyone, Salam Sejahtera, Tatya Hao, and Ani Barukum Varnakam. So these are 3 official languages from Singapore. Hello everyone, it's such a pleasure to be here. My name is Faris and I'm Malay. And in Singapore, we have Article 152, where in the Constitution, the Malays are recognized as indigenous people. But today my focus will be on the indigenous sea people who used to occupy Pulau Semakau, for example, in Singapore now, where it's a landfill, and also they occupy right now villages in Johor, which is in Malaysia. The sea people are very, very important because they represent to me and a lot of people how people used to live symbiotically with the land, the sea, the rivers, life itself. And what we have today is the ignorance of how much wisdom we can actually glean from these people's lives. So orang Semakau, orang Seletar or orang Asli, which they are part of, the indigenous people, they are actually nomadic. They are aquatic, nomadic sea people who are indigenous, and they live along the rivers, the shores in, what used to be northern part of Singapore and the southern side of Johor. But since 1965, quite a number of them who used to live in Singapore, they are now assimilated into the Malay community. And while I say I'm Malay, we are sort of like a melange or a sort of mix between different sub-ethnic groups or ethnic groups from across the Malay Indonesian archipelago, and even those who actually masuk Melayu or sort of become nativized to use, Trope term native. They speak the Malay language, they get the cultures and customs. But a lot of the language and the terms and the ways of living of the orang Seletar or the orang Laut have actually been lost over the years. And with climate change, the extreme weather patterns, the rising sea levels, the average temperature in Malaysia, for instance, is projected to increase by, I think, between 1.2 degrees to 1.6 degrees, I think by 2050. So it's hard for those who are still practicing this kind of symbiotic lifestyle with the environment, the seas, the rivers, and so on and so forth, to actually live their traditions in a way that respects reverently the environment. For example, when they fish, they would not take more than they need. They would actually give back to the sea, fish or animals that they would not eat. Now, when you are actually looking at all these things, we ask ourselves, what then, is the point? Things die out. Some people could be quite brutal and say that that's evolution, right? But it's like the fork and spoon, or the kwaito, or the chopsticks. Like, it hasn't changed for centuries or even thousands of years for things which have withstood traditions, because they've been time and tested. Through time and through the test of time, they have withstood. And a lot of the traditions actually show us a way to live with the environment that is respectful, that is reverential, that sees the reverence, even if you don't believe in the unseen realms, the amount of respect that it gives to the lands and seas. And also it's the concept that we view the world. So for example, in Malay we say tanah air, which is the land and the sea. But a lot of times from the West, we focus on the terra-centric or the sort of just the land portions, right? So the seas and the rivers and the waters is very, very important. And this is something that in Chinese we would say 感想, your thoughts and feelings, 觉得, your feelings, 感想, which is not, it's like rasa in Malay, which is like how you prioritize your values. And with that, I would like to call to action, try to reprioritize what our values are by looking at the wisdom of these indigenous people. Thank you so much.
Very much, Afari. Thanks a lot for that contribution. I struggle to hear a bit, but I hope that our audiences could hear him quite well. Thank you. Do we have any question for Fari in the audience at the moment, on the chat, or any comments? We're inviting comments as well. We might actually have some indigenous people here who also have some experiences of theirs that they would like to share. That's what the session is about. So do we have any interventions from the floor or from the app, from our online audience? Okay, if none for now, we actually have a question that was posted earlier. Davina will speak more on that, but let me just quickly intervene. So we had a question posted on the chat, I believe, and the question was about, so what actually do we define as youth? So what are the ages we consider as youth with respect to the GYSCC? So in my introductory remarks, I did mention that the GYSCC is conceptualized to be inclusive. As we know, the mantra of the SDGs is to leave no one behind. So in conceptualizing this, we're straining, our key focuses on climate action, partnerships for the goal, and also being inclusive in our use of the word indigenous, and that's why I can be leading this summit, and along with Davina and others, and also youth. So youth cuts across from whatever age you want to identify with. Some people we had actually in last year's presentations, I think there was someone at the age of late 60s who decided to identify as a youth, and he presented from his perspective. So that is taken. But we also had presenters as young as 15 last year at the summit. And in fact, this year, we're having 2 teenagers who are actually part of the indigenous youth leaders from Asia, though based in Canada, right?
Yeah, based in
yes,
Canada.
2 kids. Well, they're not kids, they're youths who are actually part of the leaders, and they will be leading sessions at the summit this year. So we are actually quite broad-based, from as young as that to as old as, well, if you want to identify as old, or if you identify as youth, that's also fine. So we're inclusive in the use of that word, just to answer that question. But I think Davina will do more justice to that in our own presentation, giving you some tidbits about the GYSCC Summit come August 9th, 2024. And so at this point, ladies and gentlemen, we now go back to Davina now. She's going to have more time. She is the global lead for this year. Very happy to hand over the baton to her. And she's going to talk to us a bit much more about the Global Indigenous Youth Summit on Climate Change. Davina, over to you.
Ketumitope, bonjour, Kimania, which means how are you in Creole, which is my local language. Allow me to thank Temitope and Paul for this initiative, this network. It's a great network. So I came to know about the Global Indigenous Youth Summit for Climate Change last year when I started a program, the Science Advice Skill Development Program, which is run by the INSA Africa. Sorry. Yeah. So, so the Science Advice Skill Development Program is run by INSA Africa, and this is when I actually met Paul, and we were discussing about potential project, and he introduced me to the Global Indigenous Youth Summit for Climate Change. And I was, oh, this is a very nice initiative, and what next? And he told me, we need someone to work on this, like take it forward. And I happily agree, because I was so impressed about this network, and I was like, we need to make it sustainable. And I started working on the project since last year, alongside Temitope and Paul. So most, I would say, Temitope has already covered some major point, but I want to touch base again on a few things. The Global Indigenous Youth Summit for Climate Change is a virtual dialogue by, for, and among Indigenous youth with global inclusion. So basically we touch different SDGs, but we have a special one about the SDG 17, right? And the beauty about the summit, it is conducted 24 hours, it's a 24-hour summit, conducted across free 8 hours time zone on the 9th August, which coincide with International Day of World Indigenous People. And it is a global partnership of Indigenous youth leaders across the globe. So in last year, Temitope has led the summit, and it was hosted by the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, UNITAR, and with the Science Diplomacy Center coordination. And they were really, really successful. Like, we had 1,300 plus registrants from different countries, 112 nations, and people from speaking 88 plus languages. And this is the beauty about this summit. We are inclusive. We are breaking the language barrier. And we want to make a safe place for people to come and express. So the rationale is behind the origin of the GYSSC. So Indigenous people are vulnerable, despite we contribute less to the different factors that is related to climate change. And they are the most resilient people. So this network allowed to provide one of its kind platform for global engagement with Indigenous youth across the world. The summit was so successful that we even received commentary from Nature, and the title itself speaks about it. Indigenous youth must be at the forefront of climate diplomacy. Indigenous youth has a word to say. Their voice matters. They have their own way of dealing with challenges. And they have their own practices that we need to consider when we are doing policy processes and considering talking about solutions. So I would say the North and South cooperation is crucial. Yes, it is crucial. But it is very imperative to adopt a for Indigenous, by Indigenous approach to ensure that local expertise and traditional knowledge stay at the forefront. So about this year's summit. So last year, Temitope did a great job, but we were missing on different aspects. Not all nation was represented. And it's quite a bit of work to reach so many people, especially if we speak one or two languages and those people doesn't speak the same language. So this year, we are trying to be more inclusive. For example, last year, the small island developing state was missing. So now I will be wearing the hat for someone from small island developing state. I'm from Mauritius, by the way. So Mauritius, the SIT, we host approximately 65 million of people. And we face disproportionate vulnerability despite we contribute only about 1% of green gas emission. We are at the tipping point, at the edge. We are facing extreme condition, cyclone, tropical cyclone, which is interlinked with food security, emergence of new disease, flood, drought. In Mauritius, for example, we never had drought before. Nowadays, we are having lots of flash floods, anytime. And we are losing our people. We are losing our houses. And also, every time after each flood, we see emergence of disease, dengue, malaria, chikungunya. So we are literally at risk every time. So this year edition, we have a special segment it is on the small island developing state. So we are going to have one session from each region to discuss on the small island developing state. So everyone is welcome to contribute to that session. I'm happy and pleased to say I'm happy and pleased to announce that the GYSCC 2024 will be hosted by Future Earth. Thank you for hosting us and for really giving us a great help with the organization of this summit. As part of inclusion, so in late March, we actually conducted a pre-summit roundtable discussion, and the focus was on socio-economic impact of climate change for small island developing state. It was a hybrid event funded by the Commonwealth Scholarship Commission, and we had around 40 people in person and participation, and around 76 participants, and they were from small island developing state, Seychelles, Comoros, Suriname, examples of just few examples. And what we really found that everyone has a story. Everyone was concerned about their existence. I would like, on this note, I would like to mention about one island where hundreds of people, hundreds of indigenous people has been recently relocated to the mainland of Panama because of the concern of rising sea level. That island is island of Gaudi, which is just near Panama in the Caribbean. So I'm also afraid that maybe one day I might lose my house. So the GYSCC is being inclusive, it is unique, it is significant, and it is a safe place to speak. Whichever language you speak, you're most welcome. Whichever country you are, we have a space for you. So I invite everyone to learn more about the network by scanning this barcode. You will get more information on it and the upcoming summit, and you may register on the platform. And if you want to be one of the co-lead for a certain region, we'll be very happy to have you. If you represent a specific culture, we'll be very happy to have your intervention. So I think I'm on time, Temitope?
Very much on time.
Yeah.
Please, very much on time. Please do give her a round of applause.
Yeah.
Very, very much on time. And, you know, one very special thing about the GYSCC is that you can feel the passion in our voice. It comes from the heart and also comes from our experiences. And as we can see, not so good experience, but we're hoping that we can bring out the good in the seeming bad as we experience it at the moment. And that's why we're making our voices heard. That's why we want the voices of the actual indigenous people who are at the front lines to be heard. Yes, so we have time for interventions. Can I just tell the tech team to keep the QR code on so people who are in person can scan and those who are online can see as well? Yes, we have an intervention here. Please tell us your name and where you're from. Thank you. Just before he gets the mic, just to say that we have about 33 nations represented here in the World Cloud poll we had online. I think we have about 33 nations represented. So this is great. Yeah. Thank you.
No. Yeah. Okay. Hi, I am Daniel. I'm from here, from Finland, Aalto University.
Okay.
I have questions and comment about the panel in general. Well, first, thanks for facilitating these sessions. It's really great to have this experience to meet indigenous youth from all over the world. And as you probably know, in Finland also live Sami people, claimed to be the last indigenous community in Europe. And I think it will be very interesting. I believe that they also face specific challenges and difficulties. And I think it's very interesting as well to hear their experiences from Sami people who live in a country where the Congress is held.
Yeah.
And we are talking about visibility, being heard, inclusivity. Is there any specific reasons why they are not here? Because I think there are many key strategic stakeholders from Finland here.
Yes. May I just ask, are you peradventure from there? Are you from the Sami? Okay, yes. So we actually do have answers to that. So I would allow Devina to intervene, and if there is need, I will say further. Yeah.
Yes, so we actually tried to reach many people, and even for this intervention, we have tried to reach the Sami community. Unfortunately, we have not received any response yet. But we are hoping that we will have the Sami representative for the summit, and their voice will they will be included in our discussion processes, even in our comments. Yeah, because we are also planning to have also comments on nature again. We are planning to have policy brief, so they will be heard. So I invite them to connect with us. As I mentioned, probably language is an issue. We will try again and again to reach them.
Yes, and may I just add more? As I said, in leading the summit last year, we did reach out, and I'll probably share the link to the summit last year, which is actually available on YouTube. We actually did have contributions and participation from the Sami. I don't know why this year. I know we had conversations with the leadership of the SRI yesterday about the different ways they tried to get them to participate at this meeting, but it seems that contact didn't work. One of the peculiarity, which I did give the feedback to the organizers, is that indigenous people are quite special in terms of networking and reaching out. Often doesn't work in the traditional Western way we do things, like writing an email or things like that. But just in case they are here or they are hearing us from anywhere, an example of an indigenous person is what you see here. Nandino flew all the way from Ecuador, and I can tell you that he passed through so many jungles and waters and almost 30 hours flight. Yeah. So many things to get here. But we can see, and even we also had challenges with even emails with him. We had to seek ways. We had to translate the emails so that we can reach him. And in fact, how we ended up reaching him at the very last minute was translating the emails from English to the local language. So it's about thinking of different ways, liaisons, and networks to actually connect, but to also embolden them to come out. That's another thing. It's one thing to connect, it's another thing to actually get them emboldened to come out and have their voices heard. I cannot say I understand the peculiarities. I don't know whether they're conflicts or fears, but the truth is that nothing will get done if you don't get your voice heard. And this platform, we can say to the best of our knowledge so far, is a safe place. And we actually want such people to come on board on the leadership. The leadership is not fixed. We're quite flexible. We're quite open. We want to see more indigenous representation across the world. This year, we are having the SIDs represented. Last year, we didn't have Australia represented. We're looking forward to having Australia represented on the leadership. So it's not even about just participating in the dialogue. It's about participating in the decision-making about what happens at the dialogue, what gets talked about. We don't have set agenda. You bring the agenda you want us to talk about to the table, as long as it's related to climate change, because it is by, for, and among indigenous people. So please, if you do have networks and connects with them, please reach out to us. We'll be very happy to onboard them.
Maybe we need to go through a process of building trust, because indigenous people are kind of disappointed at some point. There has been issues where people had taken the knowledge and has not even acknowledged them, and now they are just going away. So it's a whole process of building trust. That's why this summit allowed different language, but also it's not something is going to happen in 1 or 2 days. We are trying to build the trust, and we are hoping that more people will come in.
Thank you. We're actually now open, so I'm very happy that this has generated some questions in the room. But for those joining us online, we're seeing and reading your chats, and after just another intervention on the floor, we will take some questions that we have on the chat. But just to say, we have roughly about 10 more minutes for this Q&A session, and we'll have, I want a female, someone who's not spoken. The lady on this side, please. Yeah.
I'm going to be quick. It's not a question. I think the question that was just asked, we should take a lesson from that. I think I hear you trying to discuss. Maybe also it's not. It wasn't within your power of influence to get the Sami people here. But I will be frank, it's not acceptable. I think traveling far, language would have not been a barrier in this case. So how we converse with indigenous people and how we approach them, I think this is where the problem is. And as long as we continue thinking about indigenous people the way us traditional science people think, we will never get them into the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we're very happy to share from your experience or ideas or how or other ways we could reach out. I do agree with you, and that those of us coming from other parts of the world, reaching out to them may not have worked. And so we're very, very open to suggestions, ways that you think we might be able to reach out to them. We're very, very open to that. Please permit me to just take 1 or 2 questions online, and then we'll take more questions from the floor. We have some, and I'm just going to take this randomly. Because we have quite a number of questions. One of the first questions had to do with how do we, Thank you for your presentation. Mahmoud from Indonesia is also a Malay ethnicity. He says the problem we face is the conflict between indigenous populations and economic activities like plantations and mining. What are the thoughts on the solutions to maintain this balance? I believe this is for Fari. And then the other question is about what specific policy changes or actions are needed to protect indigenous rights, knowledge, and territories in the context of climate change. How can we amplify indigenous voices in global climate discussions? And can we have the online speakers just speak to those questions in the next minute so that we can come back to our online audience? I beg your pardon, our in-person audience. Can we have Arfari and Heather speak to those questions online?
Hello, hi. I will speak louder this time. I hope everyone can listen. So thank you so much, Mahmoud from Indonesia. Yes, Malay ethnicity, right? It's quite complex. The issue that you brought up. I think first and foremost, I think the phrasing of conflict between indigenous populations and economic activities. Well, the fact is, the truth actually, not fact, is that the economic activities are driven by people with vested interests in the land and the seas and the rivers, and also the flora and fauna, meaning to say the animals as well. There are research that have been conducted when they try to understand the impacts of indigenous populations, the orang asli, and so on and so forth, the suku kaum from the orang asli, when they actually go and, and it's always, the focus is who owns the solutioning, right? It must be the indigenous peoples, right? Because they are living there, so we cannot speak for them. They have to speak for themselves, and they know the situations that they're in. And it's complex because there was one presentation that I attended, and the indigenous people, I won't mention which suku kaum or ethnic group of the orang asli, they actually talked about how people who came in to help were more concerned about the animals there. So while there was a lot of effort being put to conserve, the flora and fauna, or specifically the animals, they felt ignored. I mean, to say that it's an irony actually, because we talk about eco-humanism and the Anthropocene or whatever, and focusing on humans, and then we talk about, well, we should focus on the animals, but now they're saying that they are focusing too much on the animals, right? The advocacy groups, at the detriment to the detriment of the indigenous people. So it's more complex than that. So what I'm trying to highlight is that it is not so simple, and it is
You,
also
Fari.
again, yeah. So it's not so simple. Yeah.
Sorry, I just had
Thanks.
to cut you short.
No
We
worries.
have very,
Yeah.
very short time, and we still have quite a lot of hands in the room. Can we just have one last intervention, Davina or Ada, to speak to the last question? 30 seconds, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll speak really, really quickly. I think there's indigenous people all over the world, and we're in all different types of situations. Some still living within a colonized state. Some, there's all different kinds of political situations. In the Arctic specifically, indigenous people really came together prior to the formation of the Arctic Council and met together. And the ICC leader right now, Sarah Olvig from Greenland, talks about this, that the indigenous people came together, and they're now the permanent participants. There's 6 indigenous organizations that are the permanent participants in the Arctic Council, making sure that indigenous rights, indigenous knowledge, and territories are front and center in those discussions that are happening. And I think that the biggest policy change that has allowed these, I don't even want to say that has given us a chair, that just feels weird, but having a seat at the table has been one of the biggest thing that happened, because it's so easy for dominant culture and populations to marginalize indigenous people and push us aside. And I just want to say briefly that the GIOISCC is still growing. I mean, like Tope was saying, or like Davina was saying, indigenous relationships are often face-to-face. And so a lot of who is part of it has been online networking, because we haven't been able to go face-to-face. And I have tried on all my networks online, and I just haven't been able to connect with as many Arctic peoples as I would wish to. So we really are constantly reaching out and trying.
Thanks a lot, Heather. I now move back to plenary. I think we had some hands up. I would like to move to this side this time around. Yes, ma'am.
I would like to hear your reflections about the prevailing feelings of your relative communities or the global indigenous youth. What is the relative share of hope versus anxiety, frustration, anger, or positive look at the future? Or what are the general feelings? Do you have any reflections on those?
Yes. Okay. So I've been doing the talking. I'd like to yield the floor to Nadino. You were at last year's summit. Yes. So I don't know. Did you get our question? Did you understand that? Can the translator help us? I would actually, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Los abuelos dicen que los jóvenes somos el cordón umbilical que conectamos el pasado y el futuro. Y desde esa perspectiva nos encontramos en una situación que preocupa mucho, no solamente la crisis climática, sino la crisis de humanidad. Y hay muchos vacíos que encuentran cuando tratan de convivir en una sociedad donde es racista, clasista, excluyente, donde por ser porque los consideran pobres a los jóvenes por el tema de la lengua, de la identidad, son excluidas. Entonces, cuando regresan a sus comunidades, empiezan en un proceso con muchas preguntas. ¿Qué hacemos? Es ahí cuando estamos dando respuestas con estas, de que las juventudes podemos caminar con los dos pies. En la una, con los conocimientos y saberes de nuestros pueblos, con nuestra lengua y con nuestra identidad, con nuestro territorio, pero con la otra, con los conocimientos modernos u occidentales, con la ciencia, con la tecnología, para poder responder a esta realidad que estamos viviendo y para hacer frente a la crisis climática y a la crisis de la humanidad que estamos viviendo.
Thanks a lot, Nadino. And, I believe we all picked yes. Okay, so let me not say any more. I would like to have a male this time around before a female, please, so that there is no bias. I think we had some males hand up. If there is none, then we can take the female. All right, please go ahead, ma'am. Yeah.
Porangará, bom dia. Eu sou Putira Saquena, sou indígena, pesquisadora, representando a Universidade Federal do Pará, mas representando a nossa coordenação indígena da Amazônia Brasileira, COIAB. É muito interessante a gente trazer esse diálogo sobre mudanças climáticas numa discussão tão pequena, né? Uma discussão tão reduzida para nós, enquanto povos indígenas, com um tempo muito limitado. Mas eu gostaria de dizer que nós não podemos discutir mudanças climáticas sem falarmos sobre genocídio, etnocídio e ecocídio. Principalmente nas Amazônias. Falo Amazônias no plural, porque são vários povos, várias línguas, cada povo olha a Amazônia no seu contexto de culturalidade. E não podemos de falar algo que eu estou sentindo falta, o racismo ambiental. O racismo ele tem cor e tem etnia. E a gente precisa tocar mais isso, principalmente nas reuniões, quando se trata de mudanças climáticas. E esse racismo ele está relacionado aos povos indígenas, quilombolas, ribeirinhos nas Amazônias, extrativistas. A gente precisa falar mais disso. E não adianta falar de uma mudança climática somente a partir do recurso, se o nosso bem viver está totalmente ameaçado com a invasão de nossos territórios, com a água contaminada e com o nosso alimento contaminado. A sociedade fica muito calada, quieta, achando que não vai passar por isso e que somente nós, povos indígenas, vamos passar por esse contexto de todo um processo de contaminação, de intoxicação. Mas, na verdade, o mundo já está sentindo isso. Eu acredito que falar do bem viver é trazer isso, porque o bem viver está ameaçado não só para nós, povos indígenas, que entendemos o processo do bem viver, mas o mundo, o planeta, já está ameaçado do seu próprio bem viver. Então, eu acredito que é um momento de nós, enquanto sociedade do mundo, começarmos a discutir a partir do que nós entendemos e o que nós estamos falando há milhares de anos já. Então, eu acredito que é um momento histórico, termos indígenas compondo essas reuniões, mas a gente percebe a falta ainda nesses lugares. E aí eu trago a academia para esse lugar. A gente precisa desconstruir o processo colonial, a gente precisa desconstruir uma ciência que não reconhece as nossas ciências. A gente precisa falar de ciência no plural. Nós somos cientistas. Hoje, enquanto indígena pesquisadora, eu reconheço que a minha maior farmacologista na história foi minha avó, que conhecia e dominava as plantas. E a gente não consegue falar na língua aqui. Eu tive que aprender um inglês para entrar na universidade, no mestrado, francês no doutorado, e a universidade nunca se interessou a ouvir e a dialogar comigo a minha língua. Então, acredito que o mundo tem que começar a olhar os povos indígenas também nesse contexto de integração, de fato, na sociedade para discutir mudanças climáticas. Caturete. Obrigada.
Absolutely. This is just fantastic. And this is exactly what we're talking about. And even though I don't hear a word of Spanish, I'm using this translator here. I could pick what she was saying and I could feel the passion. You know, I mean, thank you so much. I didn't get your name, but we would really like to meet with you and onboard you. And I do agree with that. What we're doing here is actually a small fraction of what needs to be done. But like I always say, little drops can potentially make an ocean. And we do know that we're not necessarily the first to do things like this, but we may be the first to be able to sustain it and make it a truly global explosion to bring the indigenous voices and people to the forefront. And we are in a generation and age where we have the capacities and the technologies to be inclusive in all the languages that we're talking about. I mean, who knew that I could be able to hear all she has said and read it, you know, while being in the same room with her. And it's such a very lovely moment in time for me, and very happy for your intervention. Without further ado, I would now like to invite observations from the coordinator of the GYCC, Paul Berkman. And Paul, I also know that you like to talk, but just to say you have about 3 minutes for your observations. Over to you, Paul. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tope. And to the audience, please excuse my intervention. I am neither Indigenous nor youth. For background, this Global Indigenous Youth Summit on Climate Change, quote unquote, was a comment that emerged during a University of the Arctic meeting in Maine in June of 2022. And there were certainly representatives from SOCME in the room. There was an Indigenous youth circle. There was probably about a dozen Indigenous youth, maybe some are in the room in Helsinki. And they spoke for about 10, 20 minutes with about 90 people in the circle. We all listened patiently and with intent and respect, and then eventually were invited to contribute to this Indigenous youth circle. And one of the Indigenous youth had the notion of a global Indigenous Youth Summit on climate change. And I am working with the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, and it seemed feasible to actually, with the technologies today, to be able to convene, to be able to develop a global Indigenous Youth Summit on climate change. But to my mind, it would only be authentic if it was by, for, and among Indigenous youth. And it wasn't until the International Network for Government Science Advice, INCSA Africa, invited me to contribute as a mentor that I was introduced to Tope. And with Tope's leadership, it was authentic to be able to begin to have Indigenous youth from around the world talk with each other, to share ideas, to think in terms of their shared problems wherever they are on Earth. And so emerged the Global Indigenous Youth Summit on Climate Change. It is intended to be a 24-hour dialogue across 3 8-hour time zones from 0 to 24 GMT on the International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples. And to that extent, it is the leadership, Tope and now Davina, that brings to this discussion a spirit of inclusion. And with the spirit of inclusion, as represented in the invited nature commentary, that Indigenous youth must be at the forefront of climate diplomacy, which was published in August of 2023, the concept of a global partnership of Indigenous youth emerged in the spirit of Sustainable Development Goal number 17, a global partnership of Indigenous youth, recognizing that youth and generations are at the heart of sustainable development. If we as a civilization need and develop sustainable strategies, we must tap into the wisdom and the expertise of youth. Indigenous youth in particular, because they represent dialogues across cultures that have been resilient in the face of change for millennia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. I'm really sorry that I had to cut you short, but we have just 30 seconds to round off this plenary. And so on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to invite you. You will hear more. You have the opportunity to say more, to contribute more at the GYSCC come 9 August 2024. We will still be around within the next 24 hours. You can connect with any of us. You can also connect with us on the Future Earth platform for the GYSCC. You can connect with the organizers and truly leave no one behind. Thank you very much for being part of this plenary, and we'll see you around come 9 August.